Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another show. I've got Dalton here, formerly from PFF and now just kind of doing his own thing, but really, really excited to have Dalton on here to talk Carolina Panthers, to talk NFL draft. So, Dalton, thank you for being here, and I'm just excited to get started.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having me on, man. We're starting to finally ramp up towards what we're only about a week away from the draft, a week and a half. So finally we can just kind of get all the speculation out and get it over with.
Week and a half, man. It can't come here soon enough. So it's going to be really, really exciting. Obviously, today we're going to talk just Carolina Panthers in terms of who we're thinking about Panthers for the draft. But even outside of that, just would love to get your thoughts on where you think the board is going to fall, kind of where some of your top players value, all that stuff. But getting started, I did want to maybe start the conversation at where, what kind of players do you think Carolina should be targeting at 19 in terms of maybe positions, needs? There's a lot of, a lot can fluctuate from picks like 10 to like 20. There's going to be a lot of kind of moving around and all that. But if you, in your best case scenario, who would you want potentially for Carolina at that 19 spot?
That's a very tough question, I think, for Carolina. 19 I think from about 15 to about 20 or 21, you've got this very fluid range in the draft of a lot of teams that could go in a lot of different directions, right? And I think Carolina is very much in a spot where they're going to wait and see what falls for them on the board. Because, I mean, despite winning the division, making the playoffs, playing a really good playoff game against the Rams last year, they do still have a lot of needs as an 8 and 9 team that really needs to improve, right? So I think wide receiver, if one of the top 3 or 4 receivers is still on the board for them, I think you could certainly consider it. I think Kenyon Sadiq, the tight end from Oregon, would be a consideration if he was there. And then looking to me to make this defensive front better, I look at defensive tackle. Maybe it's a guy like a Peter Woods or a Caden McDonald, depending on what they're looking for, right? A linebacker. Obviously, they have Devin Lloyd, and that was honestly my favorite signing in the entire NFL during free agency was this team getting Devin Lloyd as a new leader in the middle. But do they feel good enough about Trevin Wallace, or do they dig into this linebacker class either in the first round or with the second pick at 51? And then I think an underrated need for this team, which is where somebody like an Avion Terrell might appeal to me, is I think a nickel corner. I like Chow Smith-Wade, but he's undersized, and I think they could really do better at that spot at a position that's becoming increasingly important in the league. So I really think the first and second layer of the middle of that defense, and then, looking for another weapon. There's nothing wrong with having more weapons in your offense.
Yeah, I think it specifically too in terms of the players you kind of mentioned, or just the positions. The Panthers have been linked a lot with nickels, cornerbacks. They're bringing McCoy in for a visit. Terrell, I know he's kind of dropped in some consensus boards, but there's a lot there to like in terms of what they're going to do on linebacker too. Who in terms? Let's talk about linebacker real quick because we were talking about this pre-show, but there's a lot of this fan base. I think all this fan base really likes Jacob Rodriguez. We're all really big fans. I think the question is he the pick at 19 or is he the pick like later on in terms of what we're going to do? Well, first of all, from a prospect profile, what do you like what does Jacob Rodriguez for you do really, really well? What are the areas of growth, and how do you see him kind of meshing with this Evero style Panthers defense?
So I think in that defense, it could really work because Rodriguez, and I have him as the third best linebacker in the class behind Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese, but it's a matter of where the value is for him. Now, to me, the word that describes Rodriguez the best is playmaker. He's just an absolute playmaker on the football. He flies around. His reads and his ability to see the offensive line in front of him has gotten a lot better. You see all the forced fumbles. You see the plays in coverage, the interceptions, even just this past year, 7 forced fumbles and 4 interceptions. I mean, he's just somebody who will go out of his way to take chances and make plays on the football and force turnovers. Right now, The weakness to me, there's two things. One, he is a smaller guy. You do want him as kind of that will linebacker. He's only, roughly 225, 230 pounds. He's not the biggest guy. So you're going to get some missed tackles. You're going to get some times where you just have to live with him taking his chances, taking those risks, and trying to make plays on the football. And here and there, it's not going to work, right? But you appreciate the playmaking element of his game. And the other thing is he's, like I said, he's just smaller, right? So if you have, to me, Rodriguez fits best on a team like Carolina is an example where you already have that established middle linebacker, that leader of your defense, and he can go out there and just play free and run to the football on the weak side and really start making plays that can turn a game around. So, the conversation about him at 19, that might be a little much for me. I think he's an odd case because you have the Panthers at 19 and at 51. And I think he fits somewhere right in between that. So you move back from 19, do you move up from 51? Do you try to wait and see if maybe teams are scared of the size and try to wait and see if he gets to 51? But there's a lot of teams in the 40s, I think, that need linebackers too. So kind of an interesting player. I think he's one of the wild cards in like the late first and early second round range where I could see him going a lot of different places. It could be late in the first round to a team like a Buffalo or a Chicago. It could be early in the second to a team like the Arizona Cardinals at 34. And there's several others in between there. So depends on, if the league and the scouts are as high on him as I am, as the third best linebacker. Do they think a CJ Allen is better? I'm looking at the consensus board right now. Where's Rodriguez here? I got to find him now that I'm looking at it. He's at 44 right now on consensus. So it kind of shows you that, I think there's a wide range on this guy depending on what you already have in place and then what type of playmaker that you need at that position, because that's certainly what he is.
Yeah, I think, Roger, I agree with you in terms of I wouldn't be shocked if he is picked in the first round. Like that's how good a player he is. Two concerns for me on Rodriguez is he is undersized, and I'm not one of those guys that always says like the measurables are everything, but they do have to be taken account in terms of the evaluation. And I thought that one of the things that, and I don't know if you saw this on the tape too, one of the things that he did well was he avoided kind of contact and tackles. He was very kind of like shifty in terms of when he was going to attack. And I think he's a very aware player. And the reason he did that is because when he gets off of blocks, he's not as good as Sonny Styles is. He's not as good in terms of kind of getting off of blocks. And I just don't know if he's going to be able to do that at the same level in the NFL when these very, very physical players. So for me, he's also a player that is extremely good at like forcing turnovers. I wouldn't be shocked if we're watching Red Zone and it's like, oh yeah, he's forced, like he's had 2 punch outs and potentially has an interception. So from a turnover perspective, I think might be one of the best, if not the best linebacker at like forcing turnovers. So I like that. I just think down to down, there are weaknesses in his game, but I like him. I like him. I just don't know that 19 is the play for me, but he's going to be a really good player in the National Football League. I like what you said though, in terms of having him paired up with Devin Lloyd, because for you, I didn't know this, but you thought Devin Lloyd, did you say Devin Lloyd was like the best signing for you in free agency or one of the best?
He's to me, at the value they got him at, the talent that he is, and the career year he's coming off of, and just how much this need was for Carolina to find a real leader in the middle of that defense. It was my number one. It was my favorite free agent signing in the entire offseason. I thought it was just the perfect fit. Lloyd, to me, there was 2 teams where I would have said A+ if Devin Lloyd goes to Cincinnati and Carolina, and he ended up at the latter. I think it's a brilliant move, and it changes the middle of their defense, both in the run and passing games.
I agree. And Dane Morgan also has said in interviews before that they were going to address the linebacker position in free agency and in the draft. So to me, a linebacker is going to be picked in this draft. The question is where, right? And you asked earlier about Trevin Wallace. As somebody that's kind of been part of the Wallace experience, he has gotten better. Like he has gotten better in terms of what he does. But I don't think that just because he's gotten better and the Panthers want to develop him, that that's not going to stop Dane Morgan from getting a linebacker in the draft. In terms of the other linebackers, I'm a big CJ Allen guy. I know that he's kind of fallen. I think Daniel Jeremiah has him, or potentially there's been a couple of big boards that have him falling all the way to the middle of the second round, which is really interesting to me. But what do you think about, I guess, CJ Allen and the rest of how the linebacker position, just how it lines up on your board when you look at the rest of the linebackers?
So I've got Allen one spot behind Rodriguez in my linebacker rankings, and they're two very, very different players. When you talk about CJ Allen, you know what you're getting out of him, right? You're going to get a guy with good instincts, good vision in the run game, and a very sure tackler. Right now, he's also a little bit undersized, and I do have my concerns about his range and his change of direction, sideline to sideline, and then particularly in the passing game, right? Is he going to be a player who you kind of just have to live with? You have to live with some coverage limitations, and as long as he brings the instincts and the physicality in the run game, then fine. He actually, the more I thought about it, the name that I thought of with Allen, because to me he's just reliable is the word. I thought about Devin Lloyd's former teammate in Jacksonville, Foye Oluokun, who you go, maybe not the flashiest player, maybe not the best player in coverage, but tackling machine, good instincts in the run game, and everything within his range, he's going to get to, and he's going to play to the best of his ability. So I think he can be reliable. I think it's kind of the same conversation as far as range in the draft as Rodriguez, where I think about especially the Bills there at 26. That's really the first one where I go, if they took one of these two guys in the first round, I'd go, all right, fine, we're on the back end of it. This is a team that really needs that help in the middle. But I'm with it. I came out with some concerns about CJ Allen's ceiling. I think he can be a solid long-time starter and a guy, again, that within his range can get the job done pretty consistently. But I do worry a little bit about his change of direction and not having quite the top-end athleticism of certainly, Styles and Reese at the top. But even Rodriguez felt like the better, rangier athlete to me.
Yeah. In terms of the other guys, as we keep going down the linebacker kind of, just where they're at, where do you see linebackers like Trotter or Anthony Hill, or I know Golday is a very popular, like a lot of people like Golday. Where do you see those guys in terms of their strengths and their weaknesses?
So Golday is a guy that intrigues me the most out of that group. I have him next right behind Allen at number 5. And this is someone who's a former edge player at Central Arkansas, and he's got really good size to him, right? He's 6'4", he's 250 pounds, but he can move a lot better than a lot of guys at that size, right? And he doesn't have a ton of experience at the position yet, but that makes me think as a mid to late second round pick, maybe somebody the Panthers could target at number 51, somebody they could really develop into a nice player. He can move the way that he played linebacker at Cincinnati. They asked him to be in the slot and play him in space a lot. That's somebody who might have as high a ceiling as anybody beyond Styles and Reese that we're talking about. If he came out a couple of years from now as the third best one, I really wouldn't be that surprised, because you just watch him move and you go, man, guys that size off the ball don't move like this, and he can really cover, and you can tell he's got that physical nature of being a former edge rusher, of being able to shed blocks and understanding the physicality it takes to win within the box. So I like Golday a lot. Josiah Trotter is old school. He's an old school, heavy-handed Mike linebacker, obviously the son of Jeremiah Trotter, the former Eagles legend. And boy, he taught him every bit of physicality that he possibly could, right? He's built a little bit thicker than his brother, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Trotter Jr. is built more like CJ Allen, about 6'1", 230, but Trotter, heavy-handed hammer. Anything between the tackles, you do not want to take this guy on straight up. I'll tell you that right now. He's a big hitter. He's a really instinctual run defender. The problem with him, in an even more exaggerated sense than CJ Allen, is coverage and the ability to change direction. Is he only an early down type of linebacker that you just can never, or you're never able to develop into a coverage player and able to leave him out there on all 3 downs? But in run defense, he's awesome. If you've got a guy, he's a player actually at 51. I could see also Carolina taking on, when you think about, okay, play him with Lloyd on early downs, hope he doesn't get caught in too many play action situations, stop the run on early downs, and then sit him out and bring Wallace in for obvious passing situations. You've got better athleticism out there. I could see that being an option at 51. And Anthony Hill, I'm a little bit lower on. I see him as more of a third-round guy. Really good athlete, no question about it. As good an athlete as just about anybody in this at this position in this class. But I think he's very young. He's got a lot to learn at the position. There's times when his vision just doesn't quite match up with his athleticism, and it leaves him a step behind. So then the athleticism doesn't matter. I think he just needs – Anthony Hill's a player who needs a lot of coaching. I think if he's somebody you took in the late second or third round, I might be more comfortable in the early to mid third round. Get him a lot of coaching, get him to really see the game a little bit better, and the potential is there, but he's not quite as far along as some of these other more veteran guys yet.
I agree. I agree with that assessment. This is a really, I think Mike Renner said this is just such a deep linebacker class. There's so many players that, and it's different flavors of what you want for linebacker, right? You're talking about coverage. A lot of these guys, it's really how are they going to do well in coverage, because the way the NFL is kind of trending towards, for years now, we've heard that like linebacker's not more important. I think that's changing now. I think the linebacker position is changing in terms of what they're required to do. You're running out of more like 12, 13 personnel, like teams like the Rams, teams like the Seahawks, and it puts them in a position where they not only have to be great tacklers, they have to be good in coverage, because a lot of times you're going to be paired up. The really good offensive kind of gurus, right? You think about McVay, you're trying to put that linebacker in a conflict position where is it run? Is it pass? What are you going to do? And so you can't just be, a rusher. You can't just rush support. You also have to be really good in coverage. And if they get a matchup against a linebacker, they're going to feast on that all day. So, yeah, who is the last question about linebackers, and then we can move on. Who is the best coverage linebacker in this draft class for you?
Man, that probably comes down to three guys, because Sonny Styles as a former safety is really good. I mean, there's even times, occasionally he can get his eyes caught and be a little shallow against play action and things like that. But Sonny Styles, the range and the speed is freakish. I think you could argue him. I think instincts-wise and playmaking-wise, Rodriguez is up there. And then I think a third guy who, some see as kind of a tweener. Is he a linebacker, is safety, or just kind of this positionless football player? But Kyle Lewis out of Pitt. I would say if you're looking at round 1, 2, and 3, I would say Sonny Styles probably has the most potential there, right? They don't talk about, the Fred Warner comps for nothing, because, he's got the range, he's got the speed, he's a former safety, and he can really, really run. But Styles in round 1. I'll go Rodriguez in that round 2 kind of range, because he's so good. His vision is so good. And he makes plays on the ball. And Kyle Lewis, undersized player, 220, 225 pounds. But this guy is going to be used in some packages, in some sort of sub packages for creative defensive coordinator somewhere. I just think about with Kyle Lewis, if Mike McDonald got his hands on him, if Steve Spagnuolo got his hands on him, right? I don't think I would like him as much in just a more basic kind of standard defense that runs, I think about, D'Amico Ryans and all the talent they have in Houston. Like, their defense is very simple. So I don't know if it's the best solution for Lewis to be there. Whereas I think about a Mike McDonald and all the different personnel packages and all that, and I go, that's a spot for Kyle Lewis to succeed in the right situations. Those three guys, to me, really stand out as the best coverage players in this group.
Yeah, that's really good. I heard something about Kyle Lewis today where, and I don't know who posted this or who wrote about it, but no player of the coaches that had him has watched more film than him at Pittsburgh. Because I think he's a Pittsburgh guy, right? Didn't he go to, or am I thinking of it wrong? Yeah. So he's like, he just watches film like just all day, every day. He's one of those sickos that is, you might worry about other things with Kyle Lewis, but you're not going to have to worry about a guy that like wants to get better. So yeah, those are great. In terms of wide receivers, let's kind of switch over to the wide receiver position. When you think about the wide receivers that Carolina could take, so there's been a lot of mocks to like Casey Concepcion. I think there's just a lot of movement when it comes to that. Omar Cooper Jr. I know they brought in Denzel Boston in for a visit. I think the fan base I don't know how you think about that. to me, it makes sense why they brought Boston in for me because he is the kind of receiver that Dave Canales and Dan Morgan like. They like these big, long, wide receivers. Now, to me, I would much prefer somebody that has maybe more like yards after catch and more separation. But where do you see if they do go wide receiver? Where do you see the Panthers kind of going in terms of what you would want for the Panthers?
I lean more with you that I would like to see them get an after the catch threat. If that's KC Concepcion, if it's Omar Cooper, if they were lucky enough to have Makai Lemon drop to 19, I think I would run the card in because I have him as my top receiver in this class. I think he's just awesome at all levels, but especially in the short range and after the catch. He's so dangerous and he's so shifty, right? We'll see what the Jordan Tyson medical situation is. That might change the equation a little bit, but to me, I think the after the catch element. It's why a Kenyon Sadiq is even in play here too, because you've got a lot of traditional inline blocking type of tight ends in Carolina, but you don't have that one guy that really threatens you, whether it be down the seam or after the catch or getting in a lot of those RPO looks. I think the thing for me with Bryce Young and Dave Canales and this offense, the days when the deep shots are there, they look really good. And the days when they're not, it feels like they don't have enough answers, unless the O-line and the run game are dominating, right? To bring that in-between factor. Now, could Boston fit? Yeah, sure. He would fit in, and it would just further emphasize, okay, we're trying to attack vertically down the field with between McMillan and Denzel Boston. That's really dangerous against a lot of man-to-man coverage, especially. But I just feel like to add a different dimension to this offense would be the best route to go if they're going to do that. Now, they could do that in round one. Again, could Concepcion, Cooper, if Lemon's on the board, sure. Or, there's some other after-the-catch guys later on or slot guys later on that could help you, right? Antonio Williams out of Clemson. I think about Skylar Bell from UConn who can play in a similar, just get him a lot of screens and easy touches, things like that. Zachariah Branch is another one that could get brought up, right? So to me, that's what I would look for. I like the versatility of Jalen Coker. Obviously, you would like to see more out of Xavier Legette, but I think adding more yards after catch, adding more production on easier throws for Bryce Young instead of being so deep ball dependent, that would really help diversify this offense.
I agree. I think that would be a really wise thing to do in terms of what we've heard of how Coker is going to be deployed on this offense. A lot of people thought, oh, Coker is going to go more to the slot. Actually, I'm pretty sure he's going to play on the boundary. I think they want to use Coker as a boundary guy, as a Z. If you look at that Rams game, he had a lot of man-to-man coverage that he kind of beat, and it helped him. So I think they want to get somebody more. I mean, the way Canales does this offense is he wants all the players to play different positions. I mean, even McMillan last year played in some of his best reps came in the slot, and so there's going to be flexibility in terms of how these players are positioned and aligned. But yeah, I mean, to me, the Casey Concepcion conversation has been really interesting because I'm trying to remember. I don't know if you remember, but I'm trying to remember a wide receiver. I mean, for some teams, he wasn't even he was a round 2 guy, and now some evaluators are saying wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. So his kind of rise has been really interesting to me in terms of what's going to happen. And he's a local guy, so he grew up in Charlotte. But I'm with you on Makai Lemon. I think Makai Lemon is my wide receiver 2 after Carnell Tate, who I think is just phenomenal. But yeah, if he's available, if he's not there, if he's there at 19, he would be my guy. He does so many things well. And, I know he's undersized. I don't care. I know that he, the 40, all the stuff with the 40 and the character. I think that was a lot of smoke to me. He's phenomenal. Dane Brugler said something on the Beast about him that he's just so competitive. Talk about a guy that wants it. He just wants it every play so bad. So I think he would be a fantastic addition for this Carolina team. Do you see any issues with his just, I don't know, his measurables? And did you have any concerns about the 40 or anything like that with him or not really?
No, I mean, there was during his pro day, there were rumors about a 4.5 flat, which is just fine. There's plenty of guys that
Yeah.
have had success in the league running 4.5 flat. I was just looking at it earlier, and I think USC had it listed as a 4.46. That is plenty good enough. And I think the big thing that Mekhi Lemon has, number one, you mentioned being undersized. If there's any receiver in this draft that plays bigger than his size, it's Mekhi Lemon. The content, almost like for another former USC receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown, the contested catch numbers and how good they are make almost no sense for Mekhi Lemon being a guy who's barely 5'11".
I agree.
Right? I agree. So it's like he's just more competitive. We were talking before the show that you were watching him against Iowa. I think it was the third quarter of that game. That was the best quarter I saw any receiver play all season, right? I mean, This guy, he didn't win the Biletnikoff for nothing. He's an outstanding route runner. He can make you miss after the catch. The hands are super reliable. I think he's just one of those receivers, kind of like St. Brown, where you just go, sometimes it doesn't make sense. He plays bigger than his size, but he's a quarterback's best friend, right? And I think he would be. And I do think there's a chance with the, good but not elite speed and obviously undersized frame. I think there's maybe a better chance than people think that he could get to a spot like number 19, right? Because you know how much these NFL scouts really lean into tools and things like that. Like I have Lemon as wide receiver 1, but I'll fully acknowledge because of his frame and whatever else, Carnell Tate's probably going to be the first receiver drafted. Right?
Yeah.
6'3", can get vertical, long strides, all that stuff, all the stuff the scouts and the traits people love, right? But Lemon, you talk about playing the position, not many do it better, if any. And I mean, you talk about it's more so about separation, because how many times have we seen a guy who runs a 4.2 get in the NFL and fail, right? Because they don't know how to separate. Mekhi Lemon knows how to separate. So I think there's a better chance than you might think that he could get to 19. But he's awesome, man. He's just so well-rounded. And like you mentioned, the A-plus competitiveness and the ability to play bigger than his size really plays up.
Yeah, I think Ian Rappaport on Friday said that he's going, in their view, he's going to probably be the number 2 wide receiver taking starting after 15, and that Carnell Tate will probably, or maybe you said third, but regardless, he said that doesn't have to do with him not being good. It has everything to do with teams really wanting tackles. That there's a real desire. So many teams need starting tackles, and even though maybe we can transition to the tackle conversation, we can come back to wide receiver at some point. So with the tackle conversation, what are your overall big picture perspectives on this tackle class?
It's a weird class. It's a very weird class because, I look at, to me, the 2 best players, Francis Mauigoa and Spencer Fano. They're both right tackles, right? First of all, there's a lack of proven left tackle options, right? Caden Proctor, weighing up over 350, measuring in at 350, and I know at times played much heavier than that. Can he stay at tackle? Monroe Freeling had a breakout year this past year, but it was kind of the only time that we saw him play like an elite player, and there's still some work to be done despite the athleticism. Caleb Lomu, to me, projects as more of a late first, early second round type of player, and I think the tackle class as a whole, once you get outside the first 7 or 8 guys that are going to get picked in the top 50, I do think you're really guessing as far as A, who's staying at tackle and who's moving into the interior, and B, surefire starters, right? So I think there could be wide receiver is much deeper than offensive tackle. So to your point about that top 20 conversation and guys like Freeling, Lomu, Blake Miller, we've heard a lot of hype lately about Maxi Onicher and his potential. I mean, maybe there's a chance you see all 7 or 8 of them go in the first round just because offensive line is so important and positions like wide receiver are just deeper, right? And they go, we can get a receiver in round 3. I don't see many starting tackles outside of the top 50 in this class, at least immediately. Maybe developmental guys, but I think you're really looking at tackle being a premium position, especially with the lack of proven. The only 3 guys really that I see as proven left tackles, Caden Proctor, Monroe Freeling, and Caleb Lomu, and got questions about all 3 of those guys too in different ways. So you could see teams rush into it and do that and take offensive linemen early, knowing there's receiver depth, knowing there's defensive depth, and really just knowing that if you have a bad offensive line, you can't win a championship. That's just the way it goes, right? So figuring out these tackle situations and even interior, right? I mean, there's some teams that will see maybe Spencer Fano as a guard. You've got Venga Ioane as a guard as well, who could take up another draft slot in front of the Panthers there at 19. So I think that's the fun of when you start looking at beyond a round 1 mock, right? When you look at all 7 rounds and how many picks teams have and the depth at certain positions in a certain draft, there are teams who are going to base their strategies on the depth of certain positions and the order that they feel like they should do that in.
Yeah, I agree. This draft is not going to be, you're not going to have like a Banks or a Membu from last year. And I think that's really important to remember. Those guys are just, to me, from a prospect profile perspective, they're just not available in this draft. Now, does that mean that they're not guys that are taken in the first round that could be good players? No, I think most definitely. There's a lot of good players that could, but there are more questions when it comes to prospect profile, whether it's Monroe Freeling, whether it's Proctor. Dan Morgan, part of what we know about Dan is that he normally, when it comes to just especially defensive line, he really likes getting these SEC guys. He likes the length. He likes how big these guys are. My favorite tackles from what I've seen and kind of what I've heard is I really like Blake Miller a lot. And I know that the Panthers have never taken a tackle I'm sorry, they haven't taken a Clemson player in their history, which is crazy because of how connected the two fan bases are. But I wouldn't mind for that streak to be broken, because if you think about a player like Taylor Moton, he's phenomenal, but like he's not going to play much longer. You need to have an answer at right tackle at some point. Like at some point, there's going to have to be. And then, Max, how do you pronounce his last name?
Ionichur.
Okay. I mean, he's also someone that's kind of risen a lot. He's risen a lot in the draft boards, and he's raw. Like I think I heard somebody say he started playing football like 5 years ago. I mean, he's a basketball and a soccer player. So, but once again, nothing is a given in the National Football League. So I would rather bet on somebody like that. I really like him, and I think he's really, really good. So it's going to be interesting to see the run on tackles. I mean, starting at 3, right? Arizona is in a place where they don't necessarily want to be, because you would rather be trading back. But like, do you really want to trade back? And yeah, I don't know. So it's going to be interesting if they're going to take, Mananoa. Who are they going to take? Really is the question. But where do you view in terms of the 2 tackles from Utah? How do you view Lomu and Fano?
I like Fano a little bit better. He's got a little more aggressiveness to him. I mean, they're both, a big thing with both of them, they're both super athletic, right? I mean, when you talk about the way that these guys can move laterally into the second level, especially when you talk about teams that run zone schemes are going to love these 2 guys, right? Like I've been mocking Fano to Detroit at 17 a lot, and you move Sewell over to the left side and you put Fano on the right side, and it would just be awesome. I think similar types of players. Lomu, there's a lot of people that say, he's a little more developed in pass protection. Utah just didn't run a lot of true pass sets anyway. They're such a heavy running team, but I like Fano. He's a little bit more aggressive than Lomo is. I think they both could add a few more pounds and get a little bit stronger, but both good players, man. I mean, you talk about, to me, Fano's probably a top 15 player and Lomu's a top 30 to 35 guy. They're really not that far apart, and Lomu's got the advantage of, again, being one of the very few proven left tackles, but both really good football players, man. I've watched them both a lot over the last couple of years at Utah, and they're fun to watch.
I think even if a team gets a guy like Fano and he doesn't pan out at left tackle, he could be a Pro Bowl center for years to come. Like his flexibility in terms of not just playing left tackle. I mean, he's that athletic and he's that good. So yeah, I like the Utah guys. I really like Blake Miller, and I'm really a fan of Max as well. So it's going to be interesting because you have to address that position if you're the Panthers in some way. Mike Kay, who is a local Panthers beat writer, he knows for a fact that a center's going to be taken. He's like, I would bet on them taking a center in this draft. He's like, I'm not saying they're not going to double dip, but they definitely need to get kind of younger at the center position. Luke Fortner was an option. They got Luke Fortner, and he did okay. He did better in New Orleans than he did in Jacksonville. But I think they want to add competition to the center position. Who are your favorite centers when it comes to this draft?
I mean, when you look at the guys who have already been playing the position, not even to say for a Keelan Rutledge out of Georgia Tech or possibly a Brian Parker out of Duke who was playing right tackle, but Jake Slaughter, first and foremost from Florida. I mean, maybe the most productive center in college football down in Florida over the last 3 years. I mean, just, a lot of these guys, you're getting more of these centers every year that are maybe a little bit more undersized than we're used to, but they're really good athletes and they're really smart. And they know where to be. Jake Slaughter, to me, when I watch him, he just might not be the flashiest player, but man, it's like he never misses an assignment, right? He's never mentally off, and he's the same consistent guy week to week. Jake Slaughter out of Florida, Sam Hecht, same way. He had a great week at the Senior Bowl too, especially in pass protection against some of the better defensive tackle prospects out there. Sam Hecht, and he's really kind of scheme versatile with as many different things as they did at Kansas State. Connor Lewis, another good prospect, but coming off an injury. Parker Brailsford, if you get a little later in the draft, he's another guy, super athletic, a little bit smaller. Pat Coogan, a veteran guy out of Indiana, probably a day 3 prospect, but he could develop into a starter at some point. So I actually think the interior offensive line class, there's a couple of guys I like as potential first rounders. Of Venga Ioane from Penn State for sure. Emmanuel Pregnon, I think, is somebody in the late first round who should get a lot more noise. He's a solid player, but a lot of the center prospects, you start talking about maybe that late round 2 range, but I think especially for the Panthers in round 3 and 4, one of these guys at least is going to be available for them, and I think any number of them could be a good pick.
Yeah. There's a lot of depth, I think, at center, depending the kind of center that you want. Obviously not like round 1 guys. I don't think there's like a Linderbaum kind of like prospect here, but there is a lot of potential just centers if you want to wait kind of till round 3 or round 4. So I think that's a position that's going to be addressed. I'd love to get your overall thoughts on just who are your like guys in this draft. They don't have to be your top 5 per se, but like who are the guys that you just had a fun time watching the film on, watching tape on, that you're just kind of big on?
All right. Oh, boy, there's a lot. I'm going to start on the defensive side of the ball in the secondary. First of all, absolutely love Caleb Downs. I'm working on finalizing a top 100, and I'm very tempted. I think I'm going to put Caleb Downs at number 1. He's just unreal. Nice. Unreal football IQ, just always a step ahead. But even safety number 2, Dylan Thieneman, man, he's been one of my favorite players in college football for 3 years. I think you could argue that he's actually the best single high safety with his explosiveness and his speed in this draft. I think he's also probably a top 15 player for me. If I switch to cornerback, man, boy, do I love D'Angelo Ponce out of Indiana. I mean, he's smaller. He's 5'9". He might not even be a $180, but I'll be honest with you, if he had Mansour Delane's or Jermod McCoy's size, I think I'd have him CB1. I think he plays the position better than anybody in the entire class. His technique is outstanding. His vision. I'll be honest with you, I've watched him a lot. Until going back and doing one more watch and seeing that, I believe he ran a 4.31 at his pro day, I was like, is he really that fast? And I went back and looked at it. I was like, holy smokes. He just, even for a guy who's only barely 5'9", the way that he can open his stride up and just cover ground is unbelievable. And I mean, you talk about a guy who just week in and week out brings it. D'Angelo Ponce is up there for me. A couple other guys we already mentioned. Jacob Rodriguez for sure. Love, some of these defensive tackles. Caden McDonald is somebody who could really help. I think even could be in consideration for the Panthers at 19. But to me, this is just such a heavy defensive leaning draft class that a lot of my favorite players have come on that side of the ball. Not to say there's not some offensive guys that I like.
Sure.
It's just not, the obvious ones like Mekhi Lemon we talked about, Jeremiah Love, obviously. I mean, he's probably going to be number 2 for me. I'm in my head right now. I'm thinking he's going to be number 2 for me behind Caleb Downs, but there's a lot of defensive talent. If you need defensive help, especially, I think, especially in the secondary and an edge defender, I think you're really in luck with this draft, especially the depth of it. And I think a lot of teams are going to take that into consideration with the first round strategies.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, the way this team has set up this offense and this defense, Dan Morgan said when he first came in, he wanted to solidify the interior of that offensive line. He wanted to make that offensive line good. He wanted to give playmakers. And I think there's a push to get another weapon for Bryce, and I'm okay with that. Like I'm all for a weapon if that's how the board falls for Dan Morgan. But this defense also, I know that there were a lot of good gets. Lloyd was phenomenal. Phillips was phenomenal. But, if you really think about the Panthers and what they've done historically, they get really, they've had very good defenses. And to me, continuing to solidify defense is a good option. That's a good choice. I really like the idea of getting a defensive tackle. The issue with defensive tackle is, for me, at 19, I don't know that the value's there. I don't see any of these DTs as out of this world first round talents. I'm not saying that Peter Woods isn't going to be a good player. I'm not saying Caleb Banks isn't going to be a good player. They are, but to me, I just think that they're going to fall a little more. So, Mike Kay, who I told you about, said that after Ashawn Robinson kind of went to the Bucks, there's a hole. There's a mini hole when it comes to defensive tackle. It's not a huge hole. There's other guys there, but I do think they want to continue to get better at defensive tackle. Especially pairing somebody up with Derek Brown, who is just such a. I just don't think. I don't know if you feel this way or not, but like, he doesn't get the praise he deserves, I think, nationally, with how, just what a great player he is. And yeah, I would love for us to solidify that DT room. Who is, in terms of DTs, and it doesn't just have to be the top guys, but just guys you really like. Who are your guys at defensive tackle?
Yeah, I mean, look, Peter Woods, super talented, right? If you're looking for a 3-technique, athletic penetrator type of player, I think he's somebody. 19. It's funny you mentioned the range in the draft range with these D tackles. 18 Minnesota, 19 Carolina is probably like the very front end of the range that I would start thinking about a D tackle like that. It probably before 18 with Minnesota. I probably wouldn't touch anybody in the top 17 there. I don't know that anybody's worthy of that. I'm with you on that. But no, I mean, you look at, I love it. There's a lot of different styles, to be honest with you. Like Woods, if you need a 3 technique, you're going to think more of Woods. If you need somebody just clog the A gaps, right, and just make everybody around him better, then it's a Cade McDonald or maybe a Kristen Miller, right? Lee Hunter is kind of an odd, he's a strange build, but he's a playmaker, if that makes sense, even for his size, right? Banks is the wild card, right? Because to me, I actually see him, so many people after the combine were going, oh man, is this guy the next Chris Jones? And I don't see his game like that. I see there's 2 guys that jump out to me when it comes to Caleb Banks. One, actually, Derek Brown is one of them because I think they're built pretty similarly. And the other one is Travis Jones from Baltimore. Just big dude, long arms, super athletic player. And I think most comfortable when he's playing head up, when you talk about getting in some 5-man fronts, being a head up nose, or even getting head up on a tackle and just being able to just bench press offensive linemen and shed them. I mean, Banks's highlights are as good as anybody, but there's not enough of them, right? There's just not enough consistency, and there's too much injury problems and things like that. So, I think there are some alternatives. Carolina, if they didn't want to go there at 19, 51 could be some guys that get there, at 51. Dominique Orange from Iowa State, maybe somebody like that. Maybe in the 3rd round, it's a Darrell Jackson from Florida State, who honestly is built a lot like Banks with just a little bit with less development as a pass rusher. But a lot of the same build is there, and you can get maybe a similar type of player out of Darrell Jackson from Florida State. So I think they're really going to – it depends what Dan Morgan's looking for. I don't think it's going to be their top priority at 19. It wouldn't totally shock me if they took one, but there are options at 51 and then in the 3rd round that you could get a similar player unless there's someone you really, really have a lot of conviction on.
I know that Proctor from, is it Louisiana State or where? I don't know where you want to call it.
I think it's Southeast Louisiana.
Yeah, he has gotten a lot of buzz in terms of what he can do. What's your take on him and what he does well?
I mean, he's athletic and twitchy, right? And you want to see if that'll translate to the NFL all the way up from the FCS level. And they don't, they only get to play but maybe one FBS game per year. But he's looked good, man. I mean, I think in the same vein, if you feel like it's too rich for a Peter Woods at 19, but you still want to add that level of twitch and athleticism on the inside there, Proctor is somebody you might look at. I would say probably in the 3rd round, maybe the 4th if you think he can get there, depending on what consensus thinks of him. But again, with these defensive tackles, you mentioned it, there's no Aaron Donald in this class, right? There's so many different types of players that this is a position where I think individual teams are going to have these players ranked completely differently depending on what they're looking for. If you're looking for, a twitchy 3 technique, Caleb Proctor might be one of your top 5 or 6 priorities to go get, right? If you're looking for the run stuffing nose like a Caden McDonald, he might not really be much consideration until round 4 or 5 if he gets there. So again, different types of players, but if you wanted to add that with some pass rush potential, because there's not a ton of those guys in this interior class, then he might be a consideration in round 3.
Yeah. I think that it really is about what your flavor is for these guys, because there's so much. And even if you look at what Seattle has done, or when you look at what Philly did, the 2 last Super Bowl winners, there's such a big belief in rotation and how these guys rotate, because you need to be able to rotate these guys in a way that is helpful. Long gone are the days where you just had one guy playing one position. I think a big part of what Seattle did well, and a big part of what Philadelphia did well, is they had guys rotating in. These guys were not playing 20 snaps in a row. And so regardless of my take is that regardless of what Carolina wants to do, it's going to be a guy that's probably more on a rotation, especially if they don't go round 1. So do you want Grace, the guy from Oklahoma? Do you want a Proctor? Do you want one of these 3 techs that has more kind of 3 tech upside? Or do you want somebody that stops the run? I think that they would much prefer a guy that was a little more twitchy, but it's going to depend on where the board falls. Dan Morgan has been, if you look at his track record the last 2 years, he does not like staying still. He does not just, oh, this is going to be the pick. He either moves up, he trades back. So I'm excited. I'm excited about what's going to happen in terms of this draft. When it comes to that stuff. What are we're kind of getting here to the end of our time together, but what are your just overall thoughts for the later round? So, maybe day 3 doesn't even have to be specifically with Carolina, but who are the guys that you think potentially are sleepers that aren't being talked about enough, that would be guys that you like?
I think you just go back and look at the positions of depth in this class, right? I mean, first of all, it's a heavy defensive class. So, I mean, I look at who are the guys, maybe on the defensive line that could sneak into day 3. I think about, somebody like a Nadeem Tucker, if you want a situational pass rusher from Western Michigan, highest pass rush win rate in the country this past year in his first year really as a starter, right? I mean, I look at some of the defensive line depth and just, because you're looking for role players, you're looking for contributors. So I think on both sides of that, there's even some defensive tackles I think that are day 3, borderline day 2, day 3 guys that could help you. If you miss out on the nose tackle early, maybe a Tim Keenan from Alabama, somebody who's, not going to give you much as a pass rusher, but he's kind of the poor man's Caden McDonald, where he's going to stuff it. And then I think the deepest position on offense I would look at, probably receiver. And the more I've been looking at this receiver class, there is a lot of speed that I think is going to be selected on day 3. If you want to roll it back to the big vertical threats, the big 4-2 and 4-3 guys, Brennan Thompson from Mississippi State, Malik Benson from Oregon. Some see him as a top 100 guy. I'm a little more in the round 4 or 5 range. Malik Benson, Eric Rivers from Georgia Tech. You're seeing these receivers are coming out faster and faster and faster every year. Jeff Caldwell from Cincinnati, not the most productive year at Cincinnati, but you don't teach 6'5" with, what was it, a 4.3 flat somewhere in there? You just don't teach that. So I think what you're going to see, this class in general might lack the depth of proven football players. At that point, I think on day 3, you're going to see a lot of guys drafted on traits, right? You're going to see a lot of guys drafted on speed. I think there's a lot of that at wide receiver. I think there's a good amount of traits at tight end, right? There's been a lot of names like Oscar Delp thrown out there. I think Daquan Wright from Ole Miss is another good option. I think that's really what you're going to be looking at. So just those are some of the names. That's what I would be looking for on day 3 is, when teams are drafting certain guys and maybe they didn't have the most production ever in college, but this is, I think the second half of this draft is going to be very much a traits draft, because outside of the top 80 to 90 players, I don't think we have a lot of proven, just tried and true, this guy is going to be a starting caliber football player. This is going to be a draft where I think a lot of player development staffs are going to be put in the spotlight. If you can make a really good draft class, especially on the offensive side out of this year, you really did your job right.
I agree. I agree. Bryce Lance is another name
Yep.
of a guy that has, I think his yards per route run are just out of the charts. Now, I know the competition, obviously playing up there wasn't the best, but like he's a guy that I think, a lot of Panthers players like. And yeah, Oscar Delp has come in for a 30 visit or will be coming in for a 30 visit. He has also kind of risen up draft boards because he's somebody that didn't have the production. Like if you look at his production, but he also, if you listen to Georgia fans, he wasn't utilized the way he was supposed to. He also played with an injury most of the year and just kind of played through it. So it's going to be interesting what happens with him. And Sadiq also is a name that has, I mean, he's mocked to Carolina probably more than any other player. I would want to personally, and I know like Panthers fans don't always love it when I say this. To me, he's not the play at 19, not because he's not a good player, but I think when some people think of Sadiq, they want him to get like 7, 8, 9 targets a game. And what I've been saying consistently is this is not a Bowers, Loveland kind of situation. The production now, as a blocker, he is a willing blocker that's going to give you some good work, but like if we really want a playmaker for Bryce, I just don't think that Kenyon Sadiq is the guy there. I think you can get better value in later rounds. And if you really do want to give a playmaker for Bryce, I would much rather, like a Casey Concepcion or Omar Cooper Jr. or somebody else that's potentially available there. And I've said also historically through this process, I've said if Downs, Love, or Styles is there, like they're the pick. Like those are no brainers for me. They're not going to fall to 19, but if for whatever reason teams are like, oh, we don't want to get him because we don't want to get them because of positional value or premium position, I'm like, you don't even have to think about it. Like those are Caleb Downs at 19. I think I would run for 20 miles just because that would be how happy I would be. I would need to do something extravagant to just celebrate Caleb Downs at 19. But yeah, I'm with you. To me, Styles, Love. Those are the best players in the draft. Downs, that they're just really, really, really good players. So
even accounting for positional value, those three guys are not getting outside the top 12. Dallas at 12. If any of those three guys, maybe even Love included there, Dallas at 12 would be the floor for any of them. If Dallas passed up on Caleb Downs with their secondary situation last year, I wouldn't know. Even Cincinnati at 10, I'd be like, what are you doing? It's kind of that. I'm like, do not pass this guy up. Maybe there's a chance that a Thieneman is more realistic at 19, depending on the opinions of him within the top 20. I think he should go in that top 20. But I think this is the part that's interesting for Carolina because they're right in between that range where we're not sure what, especially in the teens, starting the hardest pick. The hardest pick in the draft for me to mock every time I do a mock draft is 15 with Tampa. Because that's the moment I feel like, all right, now I have no idea what's going to happen here. Because they're kind of losing out on the elite players. Yep. I think a lot of the elite players in this draft are going to go 1 through 14 in that range, unless we get a couple of surprises. Once I get to 15 to Tampa, every time I do a mock, it gets off the rails because you've got them looking for certain things that aren't on the board. You've got the Jets looking for everything, as we always do, and then you've got teams like Minnesota and Carolina that need a lot of things that aren't really optimal for that range. So I do think there's scenarios if there's nobody they love. I think Dan Morgan could look to trade down, and it would benefit him a lot.
I agree. I think the real meat of this draft in terms of value is day 2. Like round 2 and round 3, you can get a lot of contributors, potential starters. And there's nobody there. I have no issues with trading back. Anything else before we go that you kind of want to, just your thoughts about the draft or just the Panthers in general, and then we'll talk about where people can find you.
I think you hit it on the head there. I think the value in this draft and where teams might try to trade back and do some things is between picks probably 25 late first, 25 to 80. Probably somewhere in there is where I see, okay, you can build this right, especially on the defensive side, and get a lot of solid talent. Like a trade I really like for both sides. I do like DJ Moore going to the Bears, but the Bears getting pick 60 back for DJ Moore and picking it both 57 and 60 along with, I believe, 25. I go, they've got a real opportunity for a team that needs defensive help. You could get 3 starters in that range. I think that 25 to 80 range is really where the value is. And from 15 up into that 25, that's the part where all my mocks get weird, because I'm like, this is a range where I'm like, I feel like I'm reaching on certain guys a little bit, whereas it's not as much once we get to the back end of the first round. So the Panthers, like I said, I've thought they were one of the most fascinating picks in this first round the entire time, because 19 is that tweener spot, and they've allowed themselves the flexibility to go in any direction they want. They've beefed up the defensive line both last offseason and this offseason. The Rasheed Walker signing makes it so they don't necessarily have to take a tackle at 19, because there was a moment before they signed Walker where I was like, are we just going to have to take Caden Proctor or somebody here at 19 just to have something there? But Walker's a decent player who should be a good stopgap for him. So they're also not forced to do anything, right? I think they're a team that can let the board fall to them. I don't think they're going to trade up. I don't think they have the ammo to trade up, but they can let the board come to them and see where it goes. And if somebody, let's say, for a defensive player that Dallas or somebody might covet at 20, maybe you can get into a trade back, get into the late 20s and go, now I feel good about the quantity I have. Because a lot of these players in this range, in that, again, 25 to 75, 80 sort of range, a lot of them are going to be about the same.
For sure. I think there's going to be, Dan Morgan said, we filled out what we needed to in free agency so that we can go BPA. They're not going to be forced to go after any position. They're going to go after their best players. And that's a good place to be. It's great that the Panthers are in a position to do that, and very excited about where the Panthers are headed. But yeah, man, I appreciate you coming on and talking. This has been great. Where can people find you in terms of what you're doing on YouTube and on X and all that stuff?
Absolutely. On X, CFB_Dalton. We're really leaning heavily into college football the second this draft is over. Myself and Max Chadwick on the Preferred Walk-On College Football Show. It's same channel as the old PFF College Show. We just rebranded it. So if you already subscribed, keep watching. Appreciate you big time. Like every video you can. And if you're not subscribed yet, find Preferred Walk-On with myself and Max Chadwick. Once this draft gets done, we are getting right on the ramp towards the college football season in 2026. And of course, towards next season's draft class, that's everybody's gonna be salivating over at Jeremiah Smith and all those guys. We'll be covering it all year.
All righty. Well, thanks so much for joining, and we'll talk soon. Thanks everybody, and y'all have a good day.